causes of the political failure, but they included the capture of the regulators by industries that did not want to be regulated, the dominant pursuit of short-term business gains by short-term business executives, and the failure to distinguish when private companies should be responsible for their own defense and when the federal government needed to step in. That last was non-trivial, since the same techniques could be employed by criminal hackers, fending off who would generally be considered a corporate responsibility, and nation-state spies, who would generally be considered a Homeland Security or FBI responsibility with backup from the Department of Defense. Even if those lines were clear, what do you do about criminals who work for spies or spies who moonlight as criminals? Congress's inaction loomed large, but without blood on the streets, Mudge held little hope of that changing anytime soon. In 2003, as largely Russian organized crime groups took the leading role in spreading computer viruses for spam and extortion, Mudge saw that the big picture was about to look a lot worse. He figured the best way to help was to go to the place that had the best understanding of the problem, the most power to deal with it, and the greatest responsibility: the federal intelligence agencies. Given his sketchy associations and general anti-establishment attitude, it would have been draining to apply directly at the CIA or NSA. But Mudge could at least start where he was a known quantity, and where he had geographical and employment buffers from the people wearing braids and stars in their uniforms. A year after Mudge's top government sponsor, Richard Clarke, resigned from the Bush White House, Mudge rejoined BBN Technologies. Starting in 2004, he worked at BBN on research and development for U.S. intelligence agencies, and he trained people who would become the core of the NSA's elite hacking unit, Tailored Access Operations. Over the next 6 years, he worked on a lot of things he can't talk about. I think domestic lives have been saved as my ideas went operational, Mudge said. He told me that lives in the Middle East were also saved because his tools were used instead of bombs. In 2010, the new head of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency asked Mudge to come in-house and lead the agency's cybersecurity efforts. Mudge had thought about DARPA before, but he hadn't been enthusiastic about the agency's prior leadership. The new boss, Regina Dugan, he liked, and DARPA, founded in 1958 in response to Russia's stunning Sputnik satellite, had the coolest mission in government: the creation and suppression of strategic surprise. Like many positions inside DARPA, the post was for a fixed 3-year term, during which he would award grants for offensive and defensive breakthroughs in security. But the opportunity was incredible. This agency had steered the creation of the ARPANET, which became the modern Internet. I obviously wanted to make sure the things I depend on, that my family and friends depend on, are secure, Mudge said. I also owe a lot to my country. A lot of countries would not have allowed me to influence the intelligence community and the Department of Defense, hopefully in ways that have them make less stupid mistakes. Mudge's personal slogan had long been, "Make a dent in the universe." Now he called in a dozen of the smartest hackers he knew to help figure out how. He told them to be ready to discuss where the security industry was failing, what they as researchers were angriest about, and what DARPA could do to help. They convened in a bland Arlington, Virginia building that housed the massive intelligence contractor Booz Allen Hamilton, the company that would employ Edward Snowden. Mudge's call brought out a bunch of misfits, said Doug Song, who was among them. The group included at-stake veterans Dave Eitel, now running Zero-Day Seller Immunity Inc., and Dino Daizovi, a former Federal Labs researcher and chief scientist at government zero-day supplier Endgame. Also, there was sometime intelligence contractor H.D. Moore, who had created Metasploit, a penetration testing tool that used vulnerabilities as soon as they were disclosed, often within a day. Ninja Strike Force stalwart and intelligence contractor Val Smith came too. Mudge convened the meeting by telling them that his DARPA slot had given the entire hacking community, at long last, a seat at the table. Now, he said, let's not waste this opportunity. As they brainstormed priorities, Song asked about something different, a change in process. DARPA funded the big guys, defense contractors, other major corporations, and some university departments. Those operations knew how to navigate the paperwork, come up with slick pitches, and leverage their previous work. This left out talented small teams and individuals who had great insights from being hands-on hackers and no idea where to go from there. The son of a liquor store owner, Song had used a small business grant to start Arbor Networks. He said DARPA should go small as well, and Smith agreed. Mudge had spent enough time around government to realize they were right, and he convinced Dugan. The process itself was an impediment, Dugan said. Mudge announced the Cyber Fast Track not long after, the first program at DARPA aimed at giving small amounts to small teams instead of large amounts to large ones. Mudge funded nearly 200 proposals, all of which let the researchers keep their own intellectual property. Among the recipients was Moxie Marlinspike, whose invention Signal would come years later, and Charlie Miller, who studied flaws in near-field communication as those protocols were getting embedded in more smartphones. At DEF CON in 2011, Miller was presenting a near-field talk and bumped into Mudge, who was also speaking. Miller told Mudge some of the things he was interested in and asked if DARPA would buy him a car he could hack. "Submit and find out," Mudge said, so Miller did. He got the car and hacked away. Building on that work later, Miller hacked a moving Jeep being driven by a wired reporter, prompting a mass recall and drawing global attention to the safety issues of computerized vehicles. The initial equipment and the money was one thing, but DARPA's backing became even more important when a car company, upset at Miller's revelations, threatened to sue. Mudge warned them that if they did, the Pentagon would join the suit on Miller's side, with a significant number of well-trained lawyers. Those grants also provided a certain amount of legitimacy to the research that really helped when people were having objections. Miller said, "There are lots of research projects you see around now that would never have existed without those CFT grants, including the car hacking we did. Everyone at the Pentagon wanted to get the papers explaining the research, but before they could get the briefing books, they had to sit through a demonstration by the hackers themselves, so they really understood them. In the years that followed, other areas at the Pentagon began mimicking the fast track Mudge developed." Mudge did much more than streamline the way the federal government acquired good ideas. He also tackled a fundamental problem with the way the government and everyone else evaluated security. For decades, no one had come up with a reasonable way to estimate the worth of security products, which draw attention mainly when they fail. Likewise, DARPA couldn't figure out a logical basis for determining what to fund. "We are not going to approve a single new project until we do the deep strategic work," Dugan said. She insisted that Mudge and his boss, long-serving DARPA software chief Dan Kaufman, find a new way of looking at the issue. Mudge and Kaufman came up with what they called the Cyber Analytic Framework. The major concept: as predictable complexity increases, the defender's job gets harder more rapidly than the attacker's job does. To illustrate the problem, Mudge used the common language of Washington, a slide deck. The most eye-popping chart showed that the average advanced defense software had bloated to contain 10 million lines of code over the past decade. The average number of lines in malicious software, meanwhile, had held steady at 125. Since every 1,000 lines of code has 1 to 5 bugs in it, that meant big security products were making the situation worse. DARPA needed to seek simple and elegant approaches instead. It was a clear articulation of trend lines, Dugan said. Mudge began asking defensive grant applicants whether their approaches were tactical or strategic, how their project would increase or decrease the overall attack surface being defended, and how they would beat it themselves. The framework approach became the basis for DoD spending beyond DARPA and it got DARPA some money that otherwise would have gone to Cyber Command, one of several things Mudge worked on that annoyed Cyber Command head and NSA Director Keith Alexander. Mudge didn't mind that at all. Alexander had presided over a massive expansion of global and U.S. surveillance, as well as a culture that produced several whistleblowers and leakers while allowing employees to be hacked. Mudge loved betting on promising ideas, but he also considered it his duty to strangle bad ones in the crib. While still an outside contractor, he decried a product that automated some active defense, the industry term for measures that range from blocking suspicious connections to disabling the computers used by an attacker. Though hacking back tempts targets that feel powerless relying on the government, most intelligence professionals think it is a bad idea that would lead to chaos and perhaps an unintended war. Automating that is a terrible idea, because then an outsider can make you do things, Mudge said. Mudge also expended considerable energy arguing against demands for backdoors and encryption. Intelligence and military officials said that backdoors worked well in their offices, that access was logged and controlled, and that abuse was rare. But those were closed systems, where the people in charge could completely govern the environment. Out in the regular world, configurations get looser and privileged access leaks. Mudge didn't stop telling the truth just because he was at the seat of great power. It probably helped that his position would end after just 3 years, so officials expected less sucking up. Mudge briefed the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense, helping them understand when one of the armed forces or a contractor was claiming an improbable capability in a turf or budget fight. The Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon would call me in because I didn't have a horse running, and I was able to explain to them ground truth, he said. Mudge remained iconoclastic. Amid widespread outcry over the constant breaches of American defense vendors by other nations, Mudge observed shortly after leaving DARPA that contractors had a perverse incentive to allow their weapon systems to be stolen. Once that happened, Mudge mused at Black Hat, they could ask the Pentagon to pay for a new and improved version of their system that was not yet in enemy hands. Game theory is a bitch, he said. Yet Mudge managed to play the inside game well. DARPA always sent off its creations to new homes within the Pentagon or intelligence establishment where they would best develop. With Alexander and others predisposed to dislike much of what Mudge had handled, he sometimes engaged in subterfuge, handing off to a mid-level operative who could remove evidence of a project's heritage. At one briefing with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Alexander explained that he had 5 silver bullets that he could deploy in cyber operations. 3 of those are mine, Mudge thought with satisfaction. Mudge got the Pentagon to stop seeing hackers as the natural enemy. In fact, Mudge showed that people who grew up knowing exactly where the line was were habitually more careful about not crossing it than people constantly protected by their uniforms, bureaucracy, and lawyers. During one discussion at a large agency that was witnessed by Kaufman, an employee asked Mudge if the agency could just hack into a system in order to get information Mudge was deducing. Absolutely you could do that, Mudge told him. But just suggesting that is illegal, and it's wrong. Even within DARPA, Mudge provided a moral compass. In a fortuitous bit of timing, Mudge's scheduled exit from the government came in April 2013, 2 months before Snowden's disclosures turned the NSA and U.S. intelligence into global punching bags. On his way out, Mudge accepted the Secretary of Defense's highest award for civilian service. The citation said that Mudge's fast-track grants had produced more than 100 new capabilities, that his new method for detecting cyber espionage had been placed into operation by intelligence agencies, and that he had improved the Defense Department's ability to conduct online attacks. Mudge followed Dugan to Google, where he worked on secret projects. The best-known put a secure operating system on a memory card. The software would function properly even if the overall computer were compromised. Its features included an unchangeable logging system. The software would have been among the best possible defenses to the mass surveillance revealed by Snowden. Google did not release a finished version before Mudge left for a new venture, a nonprofit to examine code from binaries, the machine-readable instructions that programs give to computers and score them based on standard safety features. Mudge and his wife Sarah's cyber-independent testing lab functioned like the labs at Consumer Reports, scanning for the digital equivalent of automatic brakes and seatbelts, all without needing access to the source code. With money from DARPA, the Ford Foundation, and others, CITL showed that on a Mac's then current operating system, hackers would have a harder time attacking Google's Chrome browser than Safari or Firefox. Mudge aimed to make a more detailed version of such scores into something like the mandatory nutritional labels on food, telling buyers enough for them to make informed choices that reflect their priorities. Grappling with kidney cancer that brought back his post-traumatic stress disorder, Mudge saw the project through its first year, then handed day-to-day control to Sarah, a fellow veteran of federal contractor BBN. Mudge took a day job as head of security at internet payment processor Stripe, which helped pay the bills at the nonprofit. A September 2018 investment round would value that company at $20 billion. In his spare time, Mudge served as cybersecurity advisor to Senator Mark Warner, co-chair of the Senate Cybersecurity Caucus. Mudge has been extremely helpful in refining our understanding of software security, which informed our work on improving the security of Internet of Things devices. To take just one example, Warner said, referring to new classes of Internet-connected gadgets such as security cameras and thermostats. Warner also served as the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, making him the lead Democrat in the congressional investigations of Russia's hacking to help Trump win the 2016 election. It would be logical to think that Mudge's expertise aided Warner there as well, though neither man would discuss it with me. Mudge had earlier advised the Democratic Party in 2016 to tighten its security, he tweeted in 2018, but most of his advice was ignored. The other great technical mind from CDC's golden era, Christian Dildog Ryu, wound up doing something technologically similar to the work of Mudge's lab, deeply analyzing the safety of programs without access to the source code. But he went a very different route, starting with rejecting an opportunity to work for the government and ending up doing something much bigger. While with that stake, Christian spent a lot of time poring over binaries. Source code, which appears as it is written by the programmers, is 100 times easier for the human eye to comprehend, but it can also hide a host of ills. Looking at ones and zeros, though, is mind-numbing. So Christian wrote as many tools as he could to process the binaries and tell him what they were saying to the computers. That saved a lot of time while still allowing him to conduct what the industry calls static analysis of the code. As Symantec sucked at stake deeper into itself and made it harder to distinguish from the rest of the giant company, Christian decided to create a startup to fund his quest for something of a holy grail, a program that would decompile all the binaries back into human, readable instructions for analysis. From 2006, Christian served as chief scientist of the new company called Veracode. He tapped Chris Wysopal, his colleague from the Loft and at Stake, as co-founder and chief technology officer. The business plan called for them to serve software customers instead of the makers, like Microsoft and Oracle, where there were incentives to scrimp on security. Once the master program worked well, Christian reasoned, the buyers could convince their suppliers to let Veracode do a safety analysis on the binaries. If they passed with flying colors, then the suppliers would cite Veracode's approval as a badge of honor and recommend that prospective customers have Veracode do a new check on the most recent software version. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it was a lot of work. It was a 5-year business plan that executed really well in 10 years. Christian said. One early round of funding came from InQtel, the Silicon Valley venture firm set up to serve the needs of the U.S. intelligence agencies and led by former AtStake CEO Chris Darby. Darby believed Christian would make code much more secure, and he thought Christian should deploy it inside U.S. weapon systems, making sure that the code controlling missiles and the like could withstand most attacks by hackers. Darby arranged for Christian to visit an intelligence installation deep underground and give a demonstration of what Veracode could do. A senior officer of clandestine operations said hello, adding, "I'm a big fan of you guys from the loft." Christian thanked him. What a nice guy, he thought. He probably kills people. On a specially prepared laptop, Christian analyzed a blob of binary code that had been given him, perhaps a spying tool crafted by the agency. He let the program run during a lunch break and came back just as it spat out the results, describing what many pieces of the code did. Among other things, it detected a custom modification of a standard encryption algorithm. The polite killer was blown away. But the logistics of a major deal were daunting. Veracode could provide its program, but it could not be around to maintain it. Darby wanted Christian to focus on optimizing the code for such deals anyway, but Christian figured that his main customers would end up being the federal government and a few close allies. This would not be very lucrative for me, and it would have me working 500 feet underground and never seeing the light of day, Christian thought. He didn't even want to go through the hassle of getting a security clearance. More importantly, I want to have a bigger impact on the world, and I don't see it happening in the bowels of government. Once Veracode decided to stay focused on the commercial world, and Christian's team cobbled together a prototype of their master decompiler, he and Wysopal started calling old friends who were now inside the big software companies. That included Brad Arkin, an AtStake veteran who by 2008 was a senior director for security at Adobe Systems, perhaps the vendor most criticized for omnipresent software flaws in all of Silicon Valley. "Everyone knows your Flash player is full of bugs," Christian told Arkin, promising to find all the problems. "We can do a scan in a month." Arkin agreed. But the code base was a mess on a scale Christian had never seen before. In addition to regular programming foibles, Adobe had incorporated obscure encoding systems so that it could display material recorded in all kinds of formats and show them on many different devices. It kept choking the decompiler. After a month went by, Christian declared that he would not shave until he was able to complete the flash scan. That kept the pressure on him. But it still took an entire brutal year, and his face itched like hell. "I hate Adobe," Christian said. Pulling through it made Veracode's product much better. The company added big software customers, and by working through military contractors like Boeing, it could also serve the NSA and CIA. Veracode convinced software buyers to demand that their vendors allow Veracode to audit the binaries, which were stored on extremely secure computers. The first time through the ringer, most of the software providers hated it. But instead of blowing the whistle on those suppliers immediately for major weaknesses, Veracode would give them a couple of chances to improve, along with pointers about where and how to do that. Like many software and service companies, Veracode sales went up and down, with extra volatility around the end of the quarters because of the commission incentives. After the company straightened that out, and with sales approaching $120 million a year, Veracode weighed going public. The alternative was selling itself to a company with deeper pockets that could bring Veracode to more customers. The latter ended up being a better deal, and Veracode sold itself in 2017 to CA Technologies, formerly known as Computer Associates, for $614 million. It was sold and resold in the following year, the last time for $950 million. Once installed in his new corporate home, Christian could spend more time on new projects, including one called Hailstone, which allows small software developers to test their code for security flaws as they write. While Veracode typically cost $10,000 a year, they could try Hailstone free. He quit Veracode entirely in March 2019. The largest proportion of Cult of the Dead Cow members wound up working at tech companies with people who didn't know their history. That included Luke Benfey, Paul Leonard, Matt Kelly, Misha Kubeka, and Kamal Ackman. The previously outed Josh Bookbinder still works in security in San Francisco. John Lester is in Montreal. He worked for the maker of Second Life for years, then focused on electronic tools for interactive medicine and education. Dan McMillan turned toward business, becoming a sales and consulting executive at big software companies. Glenn Kurtzrock, who had always wanted to put bad guys in jail, served as an assistant district attorney on Long Island for 17 years before starting a private practice in 2017. Carrie Campbell is a freelance researcher near Seattle. Co-founder Bill Brown teaches documentary film. Co-founder Brandon Brewer, once known as Sid Vicious, is as straight as it gets. Senior Vice President of real estate services firm Republic Title, based in Fort Worth. Sam Anthony went to work as a programmer in a Harvard University lab, then started graduate school there, working on biological models for computation. He earned a PhD in 2018. Along the way, he co-founded a self-driving car technology company, Perceptive Automata. Autonomous vehicles are super good at knowing where the road is, how fast the car is going, whether something's a tree or a person, Sam explained. They're miserably bad at solving the psychology problem of guessing what's in a human's head. The techniques we developed while I was doing my PhD are perfect for situations where you want machine learning to do something where humans are incredible. Sam's company took video clips of pedestrians, showed them to humans, and asked such questions as whether the subjects were acting like they wanted to cross the road. He was using machine learning techniques to teach computers how to understand people. By the Consumer Electronics Show in January 2019, Perceptive Automata could boast of investments by Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai. Kevin Wheeler kept working in music for years. In addition to producing bands, Kevin pretended he had 3 different record labels. He would send recordings and press releases to music publications, trying to get them to write about the bands. If any of them bit, he figured he could always pay for someone to put out a real record. That gambit didn't pay off. In 1999, he and a CDC friend moved to New York to make it bigger in music, but it was tough slogging. They did 2 off-Broadway soundtracks before Kevin's partner met a woman and moved to Taipei with her in 2001. Then the September 11th attacks wiped out the office where Kevin worked, and he got laid off. The biggest problem was his partner leaving, because Kevin always did better as part of a team. "I'm not an oxblood," he said. "I was the front man. I'll help promote it, spin it, make it funny. I'm at my most productive when I have a partner pushing me, like Jive in the beginning." One other music partnership did produce a minor hit. While in high school, a budding writer named Hugh Gallagher, frustrated with unrealistic expectations for college entrance essays, wrote a wonderful spoof with CDC-style self-mocking grandiosity. It concluded, "I breed prize-winning clams. I have won bullfights in San Juan, cliff diving competitions in Sri Lanka, and spelling bees at the Kremlin. I have played Hamlet. I have performed open-heart surgery, and I have spoken with Elvis. But I have not yet gone to college." Besides getting Gallagher into New York University, it won him a national contest, modest fame, and writing assignments for Rolling Stone. Later, he created the character of a Belgian rapper, Von Von Von, and gave a televised performance of a song at Harlem's Apollo Theater with music Kevin wrote and produced. Gallagher gave him a shout-out by name from the stage in a video seen more than 1 million times on YouTube. After flirting with a career playing poker, Kevin turned to trading currency from his apartment. He reverted to being the shy person he really was when not writing under a handle or promoting a cause or a colleague with onstage antics. By 2018, the Cult of the Dead Cow had likewise faded into the background. The DEF CON and Ho performances had been over for years, and many hackers in their 20s had not heard of it, unless they picked it up from researching the past or heard about the group from older friends and mentors. Almost everyone had heard about hacktivism, even much of the general public, but they usually associated with Anonymous or other CDC successors. As with any great teacher of other teachers, the most obvious legacy of the group was the actions of those who were inspired by CDC and the next generation that they reached. That included a large swath of nonprofit activists and researchers and some of the top security minds in government and industry. At Google, security team founder Heather Adkins had grown up on internet relay chat channels with CDC and taken its disclosure lessons to heart. They had set the foundation, she said, for efforts like Project Zero, Google's wide-ranging team for finding bugs in any software and setting a 3-month calendar for public revelation. In 4 years, the group found 1,400 vulnerabilities and drove 90-day turnarounds from 25% to 98%. Disclosure is more mature now, but the stakes are a lot higher. Adkins said, companies have a responsibility to protect users. How do you show them the way? Historically, tech companies had only one goal, and that's to make money. Not until someone comes in and disrupts that does it have an impact. Those individual CDC members who were still accomplishing great things on their own, fulfilling some of the group mission, included Oxblood, Mudge, Christian, and one more person, Psychedelic Warlord. Like the others, he saw that as technology became more central to life, the critical thinking that had grown up with it likewise needed a bigger platform. Chapter 13. The Congressman and the Trolls. When she left the Cult of the Dead Cow mailing list in 2006, Carrie Campbell's farewell note included a tribute to the man who had brought her into the tribe in the 1980s. By the way, Psychedelic Warlord is moving up rapidly in politics in El Paso. I'm so proud of him. We seriously need to not claim him so his career can progress unhindered. She included a link to the Wikipedia page about the Texan under his real name, Robert Beto O'Rourke. Some newer members had not known his name, and most had never met him. Beto's last outing with the group had been the reunion at the Hope Conference in 1997, the same year that Laird Brown floated a story to the audience about the Hong Kong Blondes. But everyone in CDC honored Carrie's parting wish. His youthful participation in CDC remained secret as Beto's profile rose in El Paso. He had gone to Columbia University after his Virginia boarding school, then worked at a New York internet service provider. He also played with a punk band, Foss, that Carrie housed when it came through Seattle. Back home, he started a modest web design business that moonlighted as an alternative newspaper. Then Beto followed his father into politics, winning a spot on the city council. El Paso was one of the poorest cities in America, and it sat across the river from the mass drug murders in Ciudad Juarez. Beto advocated for liberalized drug laws and wrote a slim book with a city council ally arguing that marijuana legalization would cut down on the gangster profits that were fueling so much bloodshed. Beto had his eye on a seat in Congress, but party officials advised him to wait until the established Democratic incumbent retired. Instead, Beto took a calculated risk and challenged him in the primary. The veteran underestimated Beto, who outworked him, knocking on 16,000 doors. He showed voters the energy he could devote to their interests. He won the primary and the general election as well, joining Congress in 2013. In 2016, while Beto and others were holding a sit-in at the House of Representatives to force a floor debate on gun control, the Republican House Speaker called a recess. That invoked the congressional rule that C-SPAN can't broadcast when the chamber is not in session. So Beto began broadcasting the event from his phone over Facebook, and the network aired it. The stunt drew wider attention to the majority party's refusal to even deliberate on a vital issue, and it showed Beto's willingness to think like a hacker, to work around the established technological, political, and media procedures. As a Democrat in majority Republican Texas, Beto usually handled minority status with grace. After a blizzard canceled flights from Texas back to Washington in March 2017, he embarked on a 29-hour road trip with the Republican from the next district over. The equally pragmatic former CIA operative Will Hurd. As they drove back to Capitol Hill, they streamed live video as they chatted, answered questions from viewers, and listened to music. They talked about Russian interference in the election, the proposed border wall, and healthcare legislation as they got to know each other better. The video went viral, garnering millions of views. After Trump's election, Beto knew there wasn't much he could get done from the House. Even if the Democrats won a majority, it would take many years for him to move up enough in seniority to lead a major committee. On the other hand, if he managed to pull an upset again, this time in a Senate race against Texas Republican Ted Cruz, he could help flip that body and start making a difference right away. Under the law, Beto would have to first surrender his House seat, since he could not run for both re-election to that office and election to the Senate. It would be all or nothing. When Beto declared for Senate in early 2017, Republicans controlled the White House and both houses of Congress. Texas had not elected a Democrat in a statewide election in decades, and Cruz was among the best-funded members of the Senate. Cruz had added to his prominence by being the last plausible Republican standing in the 2016 primary before Trump beat him out. And Trump was off to a strong start in the White House, with James Comey still leading the FBI and no special counsel investigating possible collusion between Russians and the Trump campaign. Beto, meanwhile, was more liberal than the average Texas Democrat, making him an easy target for Cruz's many taunts. But Beto had advantages as well. Cruz had high negatives in polling as well as high positives. Trump's support had slipped in public polls, which hurt all Republicans. Beto, meanwhile, had communication, community building, and critical thinking skills that dated to his days as a fledgling hacker. If he believed that a popular policy was wrong, he said so. Beto's technological savvy, while not in the same league as Mudge's or Christian Ryu's, put him way ahead of the average member of Congress on the subject and helped him appeal to younger voters as well as those increasingly concerned about tech threatening privacy and traditional jobs while spreading falsehoods. Certainly, he was a sharp contrast to those members of Congress who questioned Facebook chief executive Mark Zuckerberg and stumbled over such basic concepts as its advertising-dependent business model and how Facebook differed from Twitter. Beto's familiarity with tech also helped him reach funders in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. CDC members quietly whispered about his history to a few of the most trustworthy and wealthy tech people they knew. A friend hosted an early fundraiser in Los Angeles, and Sam Anthony held his in Boston. Carrie had an emotional reunion with Beto at one in Seattle. Beto told everyone he had stayed in Carrie's house as a punk band bassist and had eaten all her Cheerios. As the event wound down and she thought of all Beto had accomplished in the years since she had last seen him, Carrie teared up with pride as she hugged her old friend goodbye. It wasn't just that politicians needed to think more about technology and its unique multidisciplinary role in the world. Those in technology needed to think a lot more about politics. Trump's election sparked a desire in many to fight back against what they saw as domestic information warfare. Security experts felt a special twinge, because hacking into the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and John Podesta's Gmail account had played a pivotal role in the election. Following the model that Jake Applebaum had helped promote, the contents of those emails were spread by WikiLeaks, reported by the partisan and mainstream press, and circulated wildly over social media. Over the course of 2017, as evidence emerged of the depth and sophistication of the efforts to promote division and Trump on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, a wider swath of the American public turned against tech companies. Inside the Silicon Valley giants, divisions crystallized. A minority were unapologetic Trump supporters, like Palantir co-founder and Facebook board member Peter Thiel, or took his ascendancy as an opportunity to speak out against what they saw as discrimination against straight white men, like a Google engineer who claimed he was fired for writing about internal bias. But many more felt caught up in a moral crisis unlike any the Valley had ever faced. Some wanted to use the money that they had earned, their networks, and some of their tech skills to set things right. Startup founder Maciej Sigłowski was watching as the president issued a ban on immigration from multiple Muslim-majority countries. Such policies grated especially on many in tech because an outsized number of founders and employees came from other countries. And some who had excused the expansion of tech surveillance under previous administrations now fretted that such powers were in the hands of an executive branch that was openly disdainful of judicial review. Sigłowski began holding meetings of concerned employees under the banner of tech solidarity. One offshoot from those meetings, led by Slack engineer and Jake Applebaum victim Lee Honeywell, created a public never again pledge to oppose immoral conduct and go public if necessary, which has been signed by more than 2,800 employees. Among other things, the signatories promised to advocate against retaining data that could be used for ethnic or religious targeting and advocate for deploying end-to-end encryption. The Solidarity meetings raised money for immigrants' lawyers and coordinated volunteer coding projects. As the 2018 midterms approached, confronted with billionaires on the other end of the spectrum spending untraceable dark money to push right-wing candidates, Sigłowski fought back with what he called dork money, funding a slate of progressive candidates around the country in districts he thought he could flip. Among his small circle of co-conspirators was Adam O'Donnell. They also advised dozens of campaigns on security, hoping to stave off a repeat of the devastating 2016 hacks. CDC itself contained almost no Trump supporters, but because of its multifaceted legacy, it had protégés on both sides of the fight. They battled on Facebook's pages and even inside that company's executive ranks. On the right were some especially voluble members of CDC's farm team and fan club, the CDC Ninja Strike Force. Rob Beck, CDC's friend from Microsoft and at stake, had been in charge of NSF for a while, and then others took it on. Membership got looser, group founder Sam Anthony said, and one branch became this awful Gamergate, neo-Nazi and Russian intelligence nexus that is ruining the world. Organized on 4chan and other sites, Gamergate's organized trolls went after female gaming journalists with mob attacks on social media before eventually coalescing behind Trump. By 2012, the NSF mostly lived on as a Facebook group. Members posted links to security advisories, breaches in the news, and whatever else they found interesting. Some of the members, though, were 4chan veterans who wanted to provoke, and they resorted to posting racist cartoons and jokes. Several considered it harmless trolling and denied being racist. But many core CDC members were deeply offended. All these people were influenced by CDC. But there was no structure or indoctrination or social vetting, said Beck, who reconnected to NSF after years away and found it jarring. Beck began sending some of the more extreme posts to Sam, Luke Benfey, and Kevin Wheeler, just to make sure they were aware. In June 2012, Luke wrote to the CDC email list with links to racist caricatures from the NSF Facebook page. I think it is deeply, deeply shameful that this sort of thing is being associated with CDC, Luke wrote. Paul Leonard, who had maintained relationships with some of the offenders, agreed that the drift in NSF had gone too far. Some of the guys are right-wing, some are just edgelords. They don't have any particular ideology. They just like blowing things up. Paul wrote to two of the offending posters, I generally consider the NSF guys to be people I want to associate with. And for most of the NSF, this really is the case. Now I have to question this relationship and it pisses me off. I don't really care about your politics. I don't even care about your racial beliefs, whether they're heartfelt or just trolling. It bothers me that you don't seem to have any kind of internal editor that can differentiate between amusing offensiveness and the kind of tedious, boring, lowest common denominator type of offensive material that shouldn't even make the grade. Laird Brown wrote to Luke, This is a painful thing to write. If this situation continues and nothing is done about it, I would be forced to withdraw from the CDC and take Hacktivismo with me. I can't be associated with this bile. They had limited options. Since NSF hacker Colton Sumners had founded the Facebook group in 2007 and kept administrative control. I gave all the misfit toys a voice, Sumners said. Luke reported the NSF post to Facebook as offensive. As the group contemplated more drastic action, Kevin reappeared and got caught up. Then he wrote to Sumners, "This is worse than I thought. I need admin access to the NSF group, and the racial stuff has to go. Bottom line, the stuff isn't strategic, and it's causing problems for me. Thanks." After a protracted struggle among the admins, the old CDC guard wrested control back. Sumner's Zero Bank Tor browser creator Steve Toplitz and a few others in NSF, including self-described black hat and white nationalist Timothy Matlock Noonan, had their own publication and social group, DSSK Core. Speaking as Matlock, Noonan declined to discuss most of his activities with me. He did say he had grown up on CDC, but that the crew had become stale and irrelevant and didn't do much hacking. He admitted to one illegal hack on the record, a 2012 takedown of a pedophile site targeted by Anonymous. CDC legend Chris Tucker, known as Night Stalker, had recently died, and Noonan published a press release under the CDC and NSF banners claiming the attack was Night Stalker's. Noonan and Toplitz had also done favors for the U.S. government, including turning over traffic they had found after hacking Iranian servers. Like the old CDC text files, DSSK chronicled various adventures, but the politics were very different. In 2015, a DSSK article reported on a trip by Noonan to Eastern Europe to see Andrew Auernheimer, known online as Weave, perhaps the most famous troll of all time. Paul Leonard had known Auernheimer from childhood, back when he wasn't racist. He was mostly an irritating edge loser who played with racism for fun and lulz, up until he went to jail, Paul said, echoing others. When he got out, he was notably changed. By the time of the DSSK visit, Auernheimer had a swastika tattooed and was staying in countries that didn't extradite people to the U.S. He lived in Ukraine for a time, and then a Russian breakaway republic in Moldova. He handled the technology behind the Daily Stormer, a Nazi and pro-Trump site run by Andrew Anglin, who spent enough time in Russia proper to send in an absentee ballot from there. Both men exhorted racist protesters to turn out in force at the Charlottesville, Virginia march, where a Stormer fan drove into and killed counter-protester Heather Heyer. It is not yet clear what else Auernheimer got up to in helping Trump, but Auernheimer was suspected of hosting faked documents in the French election of 2017 to help the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. The rot in NSF spurred CDC proper to go further to make up for the Frankenstein's monster it had created. While CDC and a transformed NSF battled on Facebook's pages, a more momentous conflict was brewing behind the scenes at Facebook, the company, arguably ground zero for the election misinformation battle. Beyond overt support from Thiel, who spoke for Trump at the Republican National Convention, Facebook's collection of data on its users, as well as its lax policies about what apps could collect from whom, allowed a secretive network of companies, including Cambridge Analytica, to collect material on as many as 87 million Americans. The companies, funded by billionaire Republican donors Robert and Rebecca Mercer, claimed they could tell from the psychological elements of that data which ads would be most effective to show to whom. Famously, the information went to help Trump. But before that, during the primaries, it was helping rival Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz, the Texas senator Beto would face 2 years later. Also inside Facebook was Alex Stamos, the former consultant at Mudge and Christian Reuse, at stake. After Snowden had revealed that many tech companies work closely with the NSA, then ISEC Partners co-founder Stamos had given a talk at DEF CON 2013, arguing that security experts had broader social responsibility and should consider quitting before harming the public. I'm a corporate white hat sellout, Stamos admitted up front. This talk is about how, if you decide to be a corporate white hat sellout, you can do that as ethically as possible. Stamos described how ordinary companies were now getting sucked into cyber warfare, citing as an example an advanced cryptographic attack on Microsoft that allowed for the overseas installation of malware attributed to the U.S., as well as constant attacks by the Chinese on Google and other tech companies. As the grandson of poor immigrants, Stamos said that he was proud to be an American, but that his loyalty belonged more to the values of the country than to any temporary set of leaders. Like doctors, he said, technologists and especially security practitioners held critical roles that might require moral obligation. Maybe this means all people deserve for their technology to be trustworthy, he suggested, before posing a series of hypotheticals and asking for a show of hands to see who would do what. In the first scenario Stamos gave, you discover a major flaw. Do you announce it, sell it to your government, sell it to the highest bidder, use it yourself, use it as leverage to get a consulting deal with the software maker, or work with the vendor to patch it and then disclose? Most picked the last option, the coordinated disclosure pioneered by the Loft. In another case, what if national security authorities want to have an informal chat? Do you accept the meeting, avoid it, or ask for an email to run by your company's lawyer? About a quarter of the audience members said they would meet even after Snowden. Stamos said he had until recently felt the same way, and he had spent hours talking to the authorities a year ago at the same conference. Now, he said, he would involve a lawyer. What about finding a corporate backdoor collecting data from your customers? If your boss says forget about it, do you ignore it, escalate it within the organization, quietly look for a job elsewhere, or publicly quit and break your non-disclosure agreement with the company by explaining why? Stamos said he was between the last two answers. He closed by urging the older and more experienced professionals to share the tough decisions they had made with newer entrants and all to think about scenarios to come so they wouldn't be caught off guard. Try to live an examined life, he said. Later in 2013, I revealed that security company RSA had taken $10 million to put an NSA backdoor in a toolkit it distributed for protecting websites. Stamos was one of 10 speakers who, as a result, pulled out of the early 2014 RSA conference, the only U.S. security industry gathering larger than DEF CON, and one founded, ironically, to contest federal demands for control over encryption. Instead of staying home, Stamos organized a counter-conference, TrustyCon, held at the same time as the RSA conference, but devoted to examining how to respond to improper government influence and other threats to security and privacy. For all his outspokenness, Yahoo hired Stamos as Chief Information Security Officer later that year, partly in response to the government tricks exposed by Snowden. But Stamos quit Yahoo in 2015. He told his staff that he left because new Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer had not alerted him about or challenged an order from the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which meets in secret to approve wiretaps on suspected international spies. This order required Yahoo to install new software to scan every single email processed by its system for a certain digital signature, such as a cookie installed on a single user's computer or an encryption key. After Stamos' team found what seemed like a hacker's rootkit installed on Yahoo's email servers, they feared that Russian hackers who had bedeviled them in the past were back, and they alerted Stamos, who called everyone into the office at 5 a.m. on a Monday. When email engineers suggested he check with the legal department, Stamos did, learned that the tap had been authorized, went up the chain to Mayer, and quietly departed. The U.S. intelligence agency's target had been legitimate, but the means by which they sought the suspect's correspondence and the undisclosed complicity of Yahoo made a mockery out of the annual transparency reports in which Yahoo estimated how many email accounts it had examined for the government. And if it would search every last email for one secret piece of information, what would stop it from doing it again for a phrase, like one expressing hostility against the current president or the next one? This story led some to proclaim that Stamos had set himself up as a sort of human canary in the coal mine, and that if he ever left Facebook, users should take heed. At Facebook, Stamos primarily protected the company itself. He also stood between users and organized criminals, sexual predators, and fraudsters. But during the 2016 election, he was on alert for activity by a group known as APT-28 that was linked to the GRU, Russian military intelligence. It was one of the groups that hacked the Democratic National Committee, and Stamos' team found that it was behind a Facebook page dedicated to DC leaks, a short-lived spot for pushing out hacked Democratic emails. They ruled that DC leaks was inauthentic, a politically neutral grounds for banning in August 2016, but internal worries about appearing partisan delayed the ban until October. Stamos' side won the fight only after DC Leaks posted phone numbers associated with financier and Russian nemesis George Soros, violating a Facebook policy on exposing personal information. After the election and before Trump took office, U.S. intelligence agencies unanimously agreed that Russia had interfered to help Trump win, and that it had spread fake news on Facebook in the effort. An internal Facebook task force looked into it and found mainly money-driven spammers trying to get people to their pages with slanted stories. Bigger priorities at Facebook were the coming elections in Western Europe, where France and Germany pressed for help.